There is a vegetable growing at the edge of every Roman ruin in Britain that your great-great-grandmother knew by name, and you have walked past 1,000 times without recognizing. Not native. Not rare. Not hidden. Growing in hedgerows and on coastal cliffs where monks planted it 900 years ago, and it still remembers, it is yellow-flowered, glossy-leaved, purple-stemmed, and every single part of it is edible. Roots like parsnips, stems like celery, leaves like spinach, flower buds like broccoli, seeds like pepper. One plant, 5 vegetables. The Romans ate it every day for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. For 2,000 years, it was the most common pot herb in every European garden. And then, in the span of one human lifetime in the 1700s, it vanished so completely that modern foragers call it the lost vegetable, the forgotten vegetable, the vegetable that archaeology had to rediscover. Not per famine, not per plague, per preference, per a single competing crop that was blander, faster, and easier to sell to people who had been taught to prefer mildness over flavor. Its name is Alexander's, and this is its archive. You are watching Buried Harvest. We uncover the foods, knowledge, and systems buried by history and industry. Every episode, we open one more forgotten vault. If you want access to the full archive, subscribe now. This is today's Buried Harvest. Alexander's is not a grain that needs threshing, not a root that requires leaching, not a leaf that carries poison unless prepared. It is immediate. All of it. Always has been. Pull the young shoots in late winter and cook them like asparagus. Peel the stems in spring and eat them raw like celery. Steam the leaves like spinach. Pickle the flower buds. Dry the black seeds and grind them into pepper. Dig the roots in autumn and roast them like parsnips. Nothing discarded. Nothing dangerous. Nothing that requires specialized knowledge to process. And yet for 200 years it has been classified as a wild herb. A coastal weed. A plant that grows on rubble and around abandoned monasteries and nowhere else that matters. This should not be possible. A plant this useful does not disappear unless something equally useful replaces it or something more powerful erases it. Alexander's was replaced. But the replacement was not more useful. It was milder. And faster. And the difference between those two things and usefulness is where the entire story lives. The archive opens in 336 BC. Alexander the Great is 20 years old and about to conquer the known world. His birthplace is Macedonia. And growing there wild and in cultivation is a yellow-flowered umbellifer the Greeks call hippozylinum, horse parsley, wild celery. It smells like myrrh. It tastes like celery mixed with parsley, mixed with angelica, mixed with something warming and resinous that no modern vegetable carries. The Greeks document it. The Romans adopt it. And when Rome marches north and west into Gaul and Britannia, Alexander's marches with them. Not as seed in a pouch, as food in the cart. By the time the Roman Empire falls, Alexander's has naturalized across every coastal region of Europe. It thrives on poor soil. It tolerates salt. It grows in shade. It asks for nothing. The medieval monks inherit it. They plant it in monastery gardens from Ireland to Italy. They grow it for food and for medicine. They preserve the roots in vinegar and salt, using the exact method Columella recorded in the 1st century. 30 days in brine. Peel the skin. Chop the pith. Store in glass. And when the winter stores run low and the fields are frozen, you open the jar and you eat. This is not folklore. This is archaeology. In 2004, researchers excavating a medieval site in Rotterdam, dated to 1400 AD, found carbonized split fruits of Alexander's in the mud. In Wales, at the Roman town of Caerwent, they found seeds at the bottom of a well. The earliest physical evidence of Alexander's in Britain: planted, cultivated, eaten, remembered. For 2,000 years, Alexander's was not emergency food. It was daily food. It was grown on the estates of Carolingian kings. It was served blanched at Versailles to accompany winter salads. It was abundant in English gardens in the 1500s. It was so common that when the herbalist Nicholas Culpeper wrote about it in 1653, he said it was grown in all the gardens in Europe and so well known that it needs no farther description. And then, celery happened. Not wild celery. Cultivated celery. Annual celery. Celery that had been bred for 200 years to be milder, whiter, softer, blander, and faster to harvest than anything that came before. By 1700, celery breeding programs were producing varieties that could be blanched under soil to turn the stalks pale and sweet. By 1800, celery was being mass-produced to replace wild herbs and vegetables. And Alexander's, which took 2 years to reach full maturity and tasted like myrrh and pepper and something older than politeness, could not compete. Not on flavor, not on speed, not on the new European palate, because something had shifted. Tastes had changed. The medieval preference for dishes rich in spices and bitter and pungent ingredients had given way to a modern preference for milder dishes that respected the flavor of the food itself. Which is a polite way of saying that Europe had decided it no longer wanted to taste anything that reminded it of the earth or the forest or 2,000 years of memory. By the 19th century, Alexander's was almost completely forgotten. And the forgetting was so thorough that when modern researchers began studying it in the 2010s, they had to call it the lost vegetable, just to get anyone to pay attention. So here's the question nobody wants to answer. If Alexander's was so useful, so abundant, so embedded in 2,000 years of European foodways, why did it lose to a plant that required more labor, more breeding, and more forgetting? The answer is not in the plant. The answer is in what the plant could not become. Let me tell you what is actually inside Alexander's, and then you will understand why it had to be erased. The seeds are rich in protein and carbohydrates. The immature fruits contain 16.54 milligrams per kilogram of ascorbic acid, which is why sailors used Alexander's to prevent scurvy and why it was grown in every coastal monastery garden. The essential oils contain up to 69% furanose-sesquiterpenoids. The primary compound is isofuranodiene. And here is what nobody tells you about isofuranodiene. In 2014, researchers found that the oil from Alexander's, which is concentrated with isofuranodiene, causes cell death in human colon cancer cells, apoptosis, programmed cell destruction. The compound targets the cancer and leaves the rest. In 2016, another study found that isofuranodiene extracted from Alexander's acts as a neuroprotective agent. It helps neurons grow. It protects brain tissue from inflammation. In 2021, researchers demonstrated that isofuranodiene, isolated from Alexander's, protects rats against the effects of acute ischemic stroke, brain damage, reduced, inflammation, controlled. This is not traditional medicine that might work if you believe hard enough. This is peer-reviewed science published in the last 10 years, showing that Alexander's contains compounds with measurable anti-cancer and neuroprotective effects. The Romans did not have a word for stroke. They did not have a word for colon cancer. They did not need those words. They ate Alexander's every day. The medieval monks who planted it in monastery gardens and preserved the roots in vinegar did not know what isofuranodiene was. They just knew that when they ate Alexander's, their digestion improved. Their energy returned. The winter sickness stayed away. But it gets stranger. Because the nutritional profile of Alexander's is not the anomaly. The anomaly is that despite 200 years of being forgotten, the plant still grows exactly where the Romans and the monks planted it. Go to the ruins of Caerwent in Wales. Alexander's is there. Go to the coastal monastery sites in Ireland. Alexander's is there. Go to the abandoned castle gardens in England. Alexander's is there. Not because someone is maintaining it, because it remembers. It is a biennial. It grows a rosette the first year. It flowers the second year. Then it dies. But before it dies, it drops thousands of black seeds, and those seeds wait. And when the conditions are right, they germinate. And the cycle repeats for 900 years, without cultivation, without care, without anyone remembering why it was planted there in the first place. The monks are gone. The Romans are gone. The knowledge is gone. But the plant is still there, still producing the same compounds, still offering the same 5 vegetables in one, still waiting. So here is the question that breaks the entire narrative. If Alexander's is this useful, this resilient, this embedded in the landscape, why is it not in your kitchen? Why is it not in any kitchen? The answer is not conspiracy. The answer is something more efficient than conspiracy. The answer is taste and speed, and the agricultural system that could not tolerate a plant that took 2 years to mature. Let me show you exactly how Alexander's was erased. Not through violence, not through law, through preference, through the patient. Methodical replacement of everything that tasted like the past with everything that tasted like nothing. The year is 1700. Celery breeding programs across Europe are selecting for milder flavor, whiter stalks, faster growth, annual harvest. Everything that Alexander's is not. Alexander's is biennial. You cannot harvest the full plant in 1 year. Alexander's has a strong flavor. You cannot bland it without destroying what makes it Alexander's. Alexander's self-seeds and grows wild. You cannot standardize it. You cannot control it. You cannot sell it at scale. You cannot fit Alexander's into the annual crop rotation that is feeding the new agricultural revolution. You cannot process it in factories. You cannot transport it easily because different parts are ready at different times. The shoots in late winter, the stems in spring, the leaves through summer, the flower buds in May, the seeds in August, the roots in autumn. 6 different harvests, 6 different products, 1 plant. Celery is 1 harvest, 1 product, 1 flavor, 1 use. And it fits perfectly into the system that is replacing the medieval garden with the industrial field. So the choice is not between Alexander's and celery. The choice is between a food system that requires knowledge of seasons and parts and preparations, and a food system that requires nothing but money and forgetfulness. Europe chooses forgetfulness. And the forgetting happens so smoothly that by 1800, Alexander's is already being described as a wild herb that was once cultivated but is now of no importance. Not banned. Not destroyed. Just rendered irrelevant. Pushed to the margins. Reclassified as a coastal weed that grows on rubble. And here's the mechanism that completes the erasure. You cannot patent Alexander's because it is ancient and wild and unmodified. You cannot create dependency on Alexander's because it self-seeds freely and grows without input. You cannot monopolize Alexander's because it is already naturalized across every coastal region of Europe, and anyone with eyes can identify it, and anyone with hands can harvest it. You cannot process Alexander's into shelf-stable products because it is best fresh, and every part has a different use, and the flavor is too strong to hide in anything bland. You cannot substitute Alexander's with anything cheaper because there is nothing cheaper than a plant that grows itself for 900 years without maintenance. The only way to erase Alexander's is to make people prefer something else. And that is exactly what happens. Slowly, patiently, through 200 years of breeding celery to be everything Alexander's is not. Mild where Alexander's is bold. Fast where Alexander's is slow. Uniform where Alexander's is varied. By 1900. The replacement is complete. Celery is a multi-billion-dollar global industry. Alexander's has 0 commercial market value, 0 cultivation, 0 presence in any store or restaurant or cookbook that matters. The only people who still know Alexander's are the ones who forage. The ones who walk coastal paths and recognize the yellow flowers. The ones who read medieval herbals and wonder what happened to all the plants that used to feed Europe. And here is what they discover when they go looking. Alexander's is not extinct. It is not even rare. It is everywhere. Growing at the edge of every Roman ruin. Thick along the hedgerows of southern England. Colonizing the cliffs of Ireland and Wales. Exactly where the Romans planted it. Exactly where the medieval monks tended it. Still producing the same 5 vegetables. Still containing the same anti-cancer compounds. Still waiting for someone to remember. But here is what they also discover. The knowledge is incomplete. The medieval methods are recorded in fragments. The Roman techniques are preserved in Latin texts that almost no one reads. How long do you blanch the stems? Which leaves are best raw? When exactly do you harvest the flower buds? Do you peel the roots or roast them whole? The answers exist. But they are scattered, buried, half forgotten. And this is the cost of forgetting. Not just the plant, the entire system of knowledge that made the plant useful. The timing, the preparation, the preservation, the integration into daily life. You can rediscover Alexander's. You can identify it. You can harvest it. But unless you also rediscover the knowledge of how to make it part of your food system, it remains a curiosity, a historical artifact, a wild herb you tried once and did not know what to do with. This is how erasure works. You do not destroy the plant. You destroy the context. You sever the connection between the plant and the kitchen, between the plant and the calendar, between the plant and the memory of what food used to mean. But knowledge does not die. It sleeps. And sometimes it wakes up. The archive shows us where. In Italy, they still call it macerone. In Greece, agrio salino. Wild celery. Not forgotten. Not completely. In Ireland, it grows thick around the ruins of medieval abbeys. In England, foragers teach identification courses every spring. In academic journals, researchers publish papers calling it the lost vegetable and documenting its medicinal compounds and arguing for its recovery. In 2014, a study concludes that the nutritional profile of Alexander's supports its recovery as a vegetable. In 2016, another study identifies neuroprotective properties. In 2021, stroke protection. The science is rediscovering what the Romans knew. And in specialty seed catalogs, you can find Alexander's listed under heritage vegetables, under forgotten crops, under old world plants that were once common and are now rare, not because the plant is rare, because the knowledge is rare, because the willingness to wait 2 years for a full harvest is rare, because the taste for something that actually tastes like something is rare, but it was incomplete. The modern revival knows Alexander's exists. It knows Alexander's is edible. It knows Alexander's has medicinal properties. But it does not yet know how to integrate Alexander's back into the system. How do you convince a farmer to grow a biennial when the market demands annuals? How do you convince a chef to use a vegetable that tastes like myrrh when diners expect celery? How do you convince anyone to remember what 200 years of forgetting has erased? You do not convince them with nutrition data. The nutrition is documented. You do not convince them with history. The history is clear. You convince them by making the cost of forgetting visible. Here is the cost. Celery gives you stalks. Alexander's gives you roots, stems, leaves, flower buds, and seeds. 5 vegetables for the space of 1. 5 harvests from 1 planting. 5 flavors where celery gives you 1. Celery requires fertilizer, pesticides, irrigation, annual replanting. Alexander's requires nothing. It grows on poor soil. It tolerates salt and drought. It self-seeds. It persists for centuries without maintenance. Celery contains minimal vitamin C. Alexander's was used to prevent scurvy. Celery contains no isofuranodiene. Alexander's contains up to 45% isofuranodiene in its essential oils. Anti-cancer. Neuroprotective. Documented. Celery is a global industry worth billions. Alexander's is worth 0. Not because Alexander's is less useful, because Alexander's cannot be controlled, cannot be patented, cannot be monopolized, cannot be made dependent on annual seed purchase. This is not a story about a plant that lost to a better plant. This is a story about a plant that lost to a system that could not tolerate independence, that could not tolerate complexity, that could not tolerate anything that asked people to remember. Half the world never forgot. The Mediterranean still recognizes Alexander's, still uses it in traditional dishes, still knows it as wild celery, still harvests it from the ruins where it grows. The other half was taught to prefer celery, was taught that mild is better than bold, that fast is better than patient, that uniform is better than varied, that forgetting is better than remembering. And now, 200 years later, we are excavating the ruins of that choice, finding the seeds in the mud, reading the Latin texts, walking the coastal paths and recognizing the yellow flowers, asking what we lost. The answer is not just Alexander's. The answer is the entire framework that made Alexander's possible. The food system that valued all parts of a plant. The calendar that tracked 6 different harvests. The palate that appreciated flavor over blandness. The knowledge that a biennial is not slower than an annual. It is more patient. The knowledge that strong flavor is not worse than mild flavor. It is more honest. The knowledge that complexity is not inconvenient. It is resilient, and that is the knowledge Alexander still carries. In its roots, in its stems, in its leaves and flowers and seeds, in the way it grows at the edge of every Roman ruin and remembers what we were taught to forget. That moment is now. The plant is still here. The compounds are still there. The 5 vegetables are still waiting. The only thing missing is the decision to remember. So, here is what you do. You learn to identify Alexanders. You learn the difference between yellow flowers and white flowers, between glossy leaves and matte leaves, between the plant that feeds you and the plant that kills you. You walk the coastal paths in late winter, and you look for the young shoots pushing through the dead grass. You harvest a few. Not all. Never all. You leave enough for the plant to flower and seed and continue. You peel the stems like celery. You steam the leaves like spinach. You pickle the flower buds in vinegar the way the Romans did. You dry the black seeds and grind them into pepper. You dig one root in autumn. You roast it like a parsnip. You taste it. And you understand immediately why this plant fed Europe for 2,000 years. Because it tastes like food, not like product. Like something that grew in soil and took 2 years to mature and carries the memory of the place where it grew, and then you make a choice. You can let that taste be a curiosity, a one-time experience, a story you tell about the time you ate a Roman vegetable. Or you can let that taste be a doorway into a food system that valued patience, into a palate that appreciated complexity, into a relationship with plants that was not based on convenience but on knowledge, into everything that was erased to make room for celery. This is not about romanticizing the past. The past was hard. The past was hungry. The past did not have the option to choose mild over bold. But the past did have Alexanders. And Alexanders worked. It worked for the Romans. It worked for the medieval monks. It worked for every coastal community that planted it and tended it and passed the knowledge down until the knowledge was no longer needed because celery was cheaper and faster and milder. And now celery is the only option. And Alexanders is the lost vegetable. And the irony is that Alexanders is not lost. It is right there. Yellow flowers, glossy leaves, purple stems, growing on every coastal cliff where you are not looking. The only thing that is lost is the willingness to see it, the willingness to remember, the willingness to choose bold over mild, patient over fast, 5 vegetables over 1. That moment is now. That choice is yours. If you are walking coastal paths in Britain between February and August, Alexanders is there. If you are near the ruins of any Roman fort or medieval monastery, Alexanders is there. If you are in southern England, Ireland, Wales, anywhere the monks planted gardens, Alexanders is there. Look for yellow-green flowers in umbels. Look for glossy dark green leaves divided into 3 leaflets. Look for purple striped stems. Look for plants growing knee to shoulder height in hedgerows and on cliff edges. But before you harvest anything, learn the one rule that keeps you alive. Yellow flowers mean Alexanders. White flowers mean poison. Hemlock water dropwort has white flowers. Alexanders has yellow flowers. Confuse them and you die. Learn that distinction before you touch anything. Learn it so well that you can identify it from 20 feet away. Learn it so well that your children can identify it. Because the Apiaceae family contains both food and death, and the difference is always in the details. Once you know the difference, harvest is simple. Late winter through early spring. Cut the young shoots at ground level. They taste like asparagus. Steam them. Butter them. Eat them while they are tender. Spring through early summer. Peel the stems like celery. The outer layer is tough. The inner core is crisp and juicy and tastes like celery mixed with parsley, mixed with something resinous and old. Early summer. Before the flowers fully open. Harvest the buds. Steam them like broccoli. Or pickle them in vinegar and salt the way Columella wrote in the 1st century. 30 days in brine. Then eat. Late summer, when the seeds turn black, cut the seed heads and hang them to dry. Once dry, grind them in a mortar. The result is not pepper, but it is peppery. Warm, aromatic. Use it like you would use any spice that carries heat and memory. Autumn. If you have permission to dig, excavate 1 root, not 10. 1. Roast it whole or peel it and boil it like a parsnip. The flavor is sweet and earthy, and nothing like anything you buy in a store. This is the full cycle. 6 harvests. 1 plant. The knowledge the Romans had. The knowledge the monks preserved. The knowledge that was erased so thoroughly that modern foragers have to reconstruct it from fragments of Latin texts and trial and error. But you do not need to reconstruct it alone. The plant itself teaches you. Taste the young shoots. They tell you when to harvest them. Taste the stems. They tell you when they have become too fibrous. Taste the seeds. They tell you when they are ready to grind. This is the knowledge that cannot be transmitted through databases or nutrition labels or scientific papers. This is the knowledge that only comes from eating. From tasting, from paying attention to what the plant is telling you in real time. And here's what the plant tells you. It tells you that flavor is not an obstacle. Flavor is information. The myrrh-like scent tells you this plant contains aromatic oils. The peppery taste tells you this plant contains compounds that warm and stimulate. The bitterness in the leaves tells you to cook them before eating them raw. The sweetness in the roots tells you this plant stores energy underground. Every flavor is a message. Every taste is data. And for 2,000 years, people knew how to read it. Then, celery taught us that vegetables should taste like water. That mild is safe. That bland is neutral. That flavor is something you add after the fact with salt and butter and anything that makes you forget what you are actually eating. Alexander's does not let you forget. Every part of it tastes like the place it grew. The salt from the coastal air. The minerals from the soil. The sun from 2 growing seasons. The time it took to become what it is. This is not more virtuous than celery. This is not morally superior. This is just what food used to be before we decided that convenience mattered more than connection. Before we decided that fast mattered more than patient. Before we decided that forgetting was easier than remembering. And now you know. Now you know what Alexander's is. Where it grows. Why it disappeared. What it contains. How to harvest it. How to prepare it. How to taste it. How to remember it. Now you know that the lost vegetable is not lost. That the forgotten knowledge is not forgotten. That the food system that valued all parts of a plant is not gone. It is just waiting. Waiting for someone to choose bold over mild. Patient over fast. 5 vegetables over 1. Every person who harvests Alexander's is one more thread connecting the present to the past. One more person who knows that food used to mean something beyond calories and convenience. One more person who can taste the difference between a plant that took 2 years to mature and a plant that was bred to grow in 90 days and tastes like nothing. Every person who plants Alexander's in their garden is one more act of resistance against the system that said this plant was not worth remembering. One more garden that looks like a medieval monastery garden. One more place where the knowledge does not have to be reconstructed from fragments because it is being lived. Every person who teaches their children to identify Alexander's is one more generation that will not have to rediscover what was deliberately erased. One more generation that will walk past the yellow flowers and recognize them. One more generation that will know what their great-great-grandparents knew and their parents forgot. This is how knowledge survives. Not through institutions. Not through corporations. Not through the systems that benefit from forgetting. Through people. Through the ones who choose to remember, even when remembering is inconvenient. Through the ones who choose to harvest, even when the supermarket is easier. Through the ones who choose to wait 2 years for a full harvest, even when annuals are faster. Through the ones who choose to taste even when bland is safer. Reclaim the name that celery tried to erase. Not Alexander's with a lowercase a, like it is a common noun. But Alexander's, capital A. The name of a plant that fed empires. That sustained monasteries. That prevented scurvy. That contains anti-cancer compounds. That still grows at the ruins and remembers. Reclaim the flavor that 200 years of breeding tried to make you forget. The myrrh. The pepper. The bitterness. The complexity. The taste that tells you this plant grew in real soil and took real time and carries real compounds that do real things in your body. Reclaim the cycle that industrial agriculture tried to erase. The 6 harvests. The 2-year patience. The knowledge of when to cut the shoots and when to pickle the buds and when to dig the roots. The relationship with time that says some things are worth waiting for. Reclaim the independence that the system tried to eliminate. The self-seeding. The persistence. The fact that once you plant Alexander's, it plants itself. The fact that once you know Alexander's, you never have to buy celery again unless you choose to. This is not about going back. You cannot go back. The medieval monks are gone. The Roman Empire is gone. The food system that made Alexander's a daily staple is gone. But the plant is still here. And the choice is still here. And the moment is still now. The vegetable they replaced with celery. The knowledge they replaced with convenience. The flavor they replaced with blandness. The patience they replaced with speed. The independence they replaced with dependency. The memory they replaced with forgetting. The Romans knew. They planted Alexanders from Macedonia to Britain. They ate it every day. They documented it in their agricultural texts. They brought it north and west and everywhere their empire reached. They knew this plant was worth carrying. The medieval monks knew. They tended Alexanders in monastery gardens for 1,000 years. They preserved the roots in vinegar. They used it for food and medicine. They planted it at every abbey and every castle and every coastal settlement. They knew this plant was worth remembering. The system that erased it definitely knew. Knew that Alexanders could not be patented. Knew that Alexanders could not be controlled. Knew that Alexanders could not be turned into a product that required annual purchase. Knew that Alexanders represented a kind of food independence that the new agricultural system could not tolerate. So they did not ban it. They did not destroy it. They just made you prefer something else. Made you prefer mild over bold. Fast over patient. Uniform over varied. Made you prefer a vegetable that tasted like nothing over a vegetable that tasted like 2,000 years of memory. And it worked. For 200 years, it worked. Alexanders disappeared from every garden and every kitchen and every cookbook that mattered. It was reclassified as a weed. Forgotten. Erased. Lost. But you cannot erase a biennial that self-seeds for 900 years. You cannot erase a plant that grows at every Roman ruin. You cannot erase a plant that still produces the same 5 vegetables and the same anti-cancer compounds and the same memory of what food used to mean. You can only erase the knowledge. And knowledge, once erased, can be rebuilt. Slowly, patiently, one harvest at a time, one person at a time, one choice at a time. Alexanders is still here. Still growing on coastal cliffs and in hedgerows and around the ruins of every place that used to know what it was. Still flowering yellow in May. Still producing black seeds in August. Still waiting for anyone willing to remember. Still offering the same deal it offered the Romans. Plant me once. I will plant myself forever. Harvest me patiently. I will give you 6 harvests. Taste me honestly. I will taste like food. Not like product. Not like convenience. Like something that grew in time and soil and memory, still containing the same compounds the monks relied on. The vitamin C that prevents scurvy. The isofuranodiene that protects neurons. The aromatic oils that aid digestion. The complexity that modern vegetables have been bred to eliminate, still teaching the same lesson it taught for 2,000 years. That some things are worth waiting for. That flavor is not an obstacle. That independence is not inconvenient. That remembering is not harder than forgetting. It is just less profitable. And profit is the reason you do not know Alexanders. Profit is the reason celery won. Profit is the reason the lost vegetable was lost. Because there is no profit in a plant that grows itself and feeds itself and seeds itself and asks nothing from the system that replaced it. But there is value. There is the value of 5 vegetables where celery gives 1. There is the value of compounds that protect your brain and fight cancer. There is the value of flavor that actually means something. There is the value of knowledge that connects you to 2,000 years of people who also knew how to taste. And there is the value of choosing. Of walking past the supermarket celery and harvesting the Alexanders growing wild on the coastal path. Of spending 2 years waiting for a full harvest instead of 90 days. Of tasting myrrh instead of water. Of remembering instead of forgetting. That value cannot be measured in dollars. It can only be measured in moments. In the moment you recognize the yellow flowers, in the moment you taste the stem and understand why the Romans carried this plant to the edge of their empire. In the moment you realize the lost vegetable was never lost. You just were not looking. The vegetable they erased, the knowledge they buried, the flavor they taught you was too strong. The plant they reclassified as a weed, so you would walk past it without recognizing what it was or what it offered or what it still remembers. The Romans knew. 2,000 years of daily harvest. Medieval monks knew. 1,000 years of monastery gardens. The system that replaced it definitely knew. 200 years of patient, profitable forgetting. Now you know. The yellow flowers mean Alexanders. The purple stems mean harvest. The black seeds mean grind them. The roots mean roast them. The stems mean peel them. The leaves mean cook them. The flavor means remember. Alexanders is still here. Still growing at the ruins. Still producing 5 vegetables. Still containing medicinal compounds. still waiting for anyone willing to remember what their ancestors knew and the system tried to erase. It can feed you. If this opens something for you, subscribe. Every share helps preserve knowledge they spent 200 years trying to erase. The next vault opens soon.